The following is a paid program. The content has been provided by Vastola Legal. WFTL, its staff, management, and ownership are not responsible for the content. Some of the opinions and endorsements provided herein were in exchange for compensation from Vastola Legal.
Are you ready for some free legal advice? We can hear the roosters, but it's never too early to know your rights. Feel free to call into the show in the next 25 minutes with questions of your own. Just dial 877-850-8585. Without further ado, here's your host of Know Your Rights, Attorney Jeff Vastola.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in. This is 30 minutes of free legal advice, and I am Jeff Vastola, your host. I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for over 22 years, and I have a couple of offices in Florida representing clients throughout the state. This show is brought to you by my law firm. Unfortunately, the show is not free. My law firm pays for the show every weekend, so I'm happy to be here, happy to give you free legal advice, but if you think that you have a case that you'd like to run by us, feel free to contact us. My main number to reach me at the office, it's a toll-free number that gets forwarded to my cell phone. It's 833-VASTOLA. That's 833-827-8652. You can call that number anytime you want, and that is forwarded to my cell phone all the time. If I don't answer, leave me a message, and I will call you back, and then we can make arrangements to meet up or just talk over the phone. So anyway, that's Vastola Legal is my law firm. We have offices in Palm Beach Gardens and Stuart. If you want to find out more about us, you can go to the website. That is www.vastolalegal.com. And if you need to know how to spell Vastola, that's V as in Victor, A-S-T-O-L-A. So good morning to all of you. I want to finish up today a conversation I started last week on what to do in the event that you're involved in a car accident. Many of you probably already have been involved in one, and maybe you know what to do, but there are plenty of people out there that have never been involved in a car accident, and so this is just meant to be some helpful advice to them so that hopefully everything goes smooth. Here's the best advice I can give to all of you out there, whether you've been involved in a car accident or not, and that is to review your automobile policy immediately, because there is nothing that you can do to go back and change your policy retroactively. After an accident, you can't go back and change things to make it the way you want it to be. And more often than not, people purchase automobile insurance policies without knowing what's on them, and they don't know what the optional coverages can do for them, and they decline the optional coverages. And that's a mistake. The golden rule with health insurance and automobile insurance specifically is to buy as much insurance as you can afford. And so if you have the ability to consider optional coverages, then you really ought to do that. Now, it may sound like I'm an insurance salesman. I'm not. I just, as an injury attorney, I've seen over the years how not having the right kind of insurance can really affect you if you're involved in an accident. And I say this all the time. How many people that are involved in an accident leave their house that morning saying, you know what, I think I'm going to be involved in a car accident today? Nobody does that. You never know when it's going to happen. And it can happen to you. If you've never had an accident, knock on wood, like myself, don't think that you're immune. Don't think that it only happens to other people, because it can happen to you. I hope it does not, but it can. Review your automobile policy, because if you don't have certain coverages on it, and I'm going to talk about a few more today, then first thing Monday morning, you can certainly contact your agent or the insurance company and make those changes. So we're going to talk about a car accident. We're going to assume it's a car accident that you're not involved in. I'm sorry, that you're not at fault. You're involved in it, of course, but you're not at fault, and what you should do. First, we covered some of the basics last week. The PIP and the property damage insurance coverages are mandatory in the state of Florida. Those you can't avoid. Those are the two coverages that you're going to have on your policy. And the PIP insurance is there to make sure that you have some money to pay for any necessary medical that you may require. So if you don't have any health insurance and you're at the scene of a car accident and you're hurting, don't refuse to go to the hospital because you think you're going to get left with a huge bill, because there's up to $10,000 of coverage that can be used to pay for medical treatment. The automobile insurance pays 80% of all reasonable amounts. Now, I don't want everyone to, run to the hospital and say, go ahead and do the full workup because I heard this guy on the radio and he said I'm not going to have a bill. Be careful, because if you go to the emergency room and they say, you know what, you need a CT scan, then unfortunately you need to say, okay, well, is it absolutely mandatory? Is my injury severe enough that you need to look? If you've had a head injury, you need to have it done. There's no question about it. But a CT scan can get very expensive, and before you know it, your $10,000 of coverage could be out the window. But it's there. It's there for you. That's the portion of insurance that's considered to be no fault. It doesn't matter whose fault the car accident is. If you're involved in a car accident, you have PIP insurance to protect you. Now, I'm talking about a car accident in the context of it being somebody else's fault. But hey, if you're driving down the road and you're on your cell phone, like you should not be, and you run into somebody from behind and you get hurt, well, you can use your PIP insurance to go get medical treatment because it's a no-fault coverage. It doesn't matter whose fault the accident is. Now, are you going to recover money from the other person because you hit them from behind? Most likely not, because you caused the accident. You don't get to recover money for an accident that you caused. Now, I had to be very lawyerly and say most likely not, because there are very limited situations where somebody in the front can actually cause the accident and cause you to strike them from behind. And I have a very interesting anecdote because this almost happened to me about 4 days ago. I was driving home from my Stuart office on US 1. I was driving south, and I saw probably about maybe a quarter mile up the road, I saw a red pickup truck come out of a Publix plaza and cross 2 lanes of southbound traffic to get into a left U-turn lane. And there was a cutout for it. So the problem was he tried to make the turn so sharp that the rear end of his bed was sticking into my lane. And I could see it from as far back as I was, so I started to slow. And sure enough, as I got closer to this guy, he put his truck in reverse and came into my lane so that he could then turn the wheel sharper and get fully into his left U-turn lane. Now, I saw it from a far enough distance back that I obviously didn't strike the guy, but if he had done that in just a moment's, time before I was traveling right beside him, I would have hit him from behind. He probably would have destroyed my car. And that's a situation where even though I hit somebody from behind, that would not have been my fault, because of course you're not allowed to back up into a oncoming lane of traffic. So anyway, I said more often than not, if you hit somebody from behind, it's going to be your fault. But
that sounds like a daily thing in Stuart.
You know what? It sure is, especially this time of year.
Yeah.
As I drove by, I took a peek in the window. Didn't use any gestures or anything. Just kind of wanted to get an idea of who I was dealing with. And sure enough, he fell into that demographic of person that is typically here during the season. And I don't know whether it just doesn't even occur to him that he's backing into an oncoming lane of traffic, or maybe he looked and didn't see.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he did look. I don't know. He didn't cause an accident, so I can't complain too
Luckily,
loud.
your awareness,
Yeah, and luckily I wasn't speeding, and I was paying attention. But it could have been bad. And what I like to talk about on the show oftentimes are things that happened to me during the week. And as this discussion progresses, you'll see that there's a couple of people I spoke with this week, and I'm going to be talking about them specifically. But yeah, it could have been bad. So anyway, pay attention while you're driving and don't back up into oncoming traffic. So you've got the money on PIP coverage to go get medical treatment. So don't think I'm really hurting right now, but I'm not going to go to the hospital because I don't have health insurance and I can't afford this. Don't think like that, because there's money there for you, assuming that you have legitimate insurance on your vehicle. Now, the property damage is there for if you are at fault in causing property damage to somebody else's property. More often than not, it's the other car, if it's a car accident. If you run over somebody's mailbox, your property damage is there to do that. If you run through a storefront, we see that down here quite a bit too, then your property damage is there to pay for that kind of stuff. I always recommend the minimum is $10,000. If you live in South Florida, I would opt for more coverage than that, because if you run into the back of a Bentley, $10,000 is not going to be enough to fix the other car. And so guess what happens if you cause damage to another car and the amount of coverage on your policy is not enough? Do you think that your insurance company has to make up the difference? No, you do. If you cause $50,000 of damage to an exotic car and you only have 10, well, basic math tells you you're $40,000 in the hole. But if you increase your coverage on your property damage policy from $10,000 in property damage to $50,000, you're talking about a difference of probably $25 every 6 months. So please review your automobile policy. And if you feel like you've got insufficient coverage, then reach out to your agent or your insurance company on Monday and fix it, because you can always fix it. You just can't do it retroactively. So be proactive about this. So if you're at the scene of an accident and it wasn't your fault and you're hurting, you've got the PIP to make sure that you get seen, whether you take the ambulance or not. Remember that you've only got 14 days to get treatment for an emergency medical condition, or you can lose your PIP coverage. And that's important because a lot of people will wait longer than 2 weeks. They'll say to themselves, geez, this nagging pain that I've had in my shoulder, it's not going away. I thought that was from the seatbelt, and I thought that it was, just something that was going to go away in a couple of weeks. They finally make it to their doctor or to the emergency room, and guess what? That $10,000 of PIP that you pay for because you pay an insurance premium, it's gone because you waited 14 days. It never used to be like that. That's a law that came out in about 2011, I think. And it's awful, in my opinion, because it's a coverage that you pay for when you pay your premium, and I don't think that the insurance company should be allowed to just say they're not going to pay that coverage after 14 days, but there it is. So if you're at the scene and it's not your fault, get treatment if you need it. But here's another bunch of red tape that typically happens if your car is damaged and gets towed away. You have to be proactive about the damage to your vehicle. Now, if it wasn't your fault, and if it clearly wasn't your fault, and if the other driver had legitimate insurance, then and had enough, then the other driver's insurance company should take care of the property damage. And 9 times out of 10, it works fluidly. There are no problems. But every once in a while, there's a problem, and there can be a problem for any number of reasons. There can be a problem because maybe the person that caused the accident had no insurance. Believe it or not, there's people driving on the road and they just don't have any insurance. There could be a problem because you may have an expensive car, and let's say more than one car is involved in the crash. Let's say 3 cars are banged up. Do you think $10,000 is going to be enough to repair 3 cars? Especially if they're banged up pretty bad? No, it's not. There's the problem of insufficient coverage, where there may not be enough to fix your car entirely. Or if your car's totaled, is there going to be enough coverage to pay you and your finance company the value of your car? Remember, the state required minimums for PIP and property damage are only $10,000 each. And a lot of people need, because of a fixed budget of some kind, they need economical insurance, and they get the state required minimums, and $10,000 may not be enough. So what can you do? Well, I'm glad you asked. You can protect yourself by purchasing on your automobile insurance policy optional coverages. You can purchase what's called collision coverage, so that if your vehicle is damaged or totaled by another person that doesn't have any or doesn't have enough insurance, you can then tap into your own policy penalty free. They don't penalize you for using it because you've paid additional premium, but you can tap into your own policy to have the difference paid. So, or to have the entire thing paid. Now, anybody listening that's been through this before might say, yeah, but I did that and I had to pay my deductible. And that's true. If you utilize the coverage on your policy, keep in mind that there may be a deductible applicable, and that just depends on what you opted for when you bought the policy. If you opt for no deductible, then you can have no deductible, but you're going to pay more in premium. If the other driver's policy is going to pay for the damage and it's sufficient and they're doing a good job, you don't have to pay a deductible. So just keep that in mind. You do have choices if you've been involved in an accident and if you have the optional collision coverage. Now, depending on what automobile insurance company you have, you might want to use your own and pay the deductible, because you might have, if you have a very good policy, you might have a policy that says that they will not use aftermarket parts. Believe it or not, the law in Florida says that an insurance company for the other driver is allowed to use aftermarket parts to fix your car. So keep that in mind. Now, if you have a vehicle that's damaged, it has to be towed and it's brought to a tow yard. Please be aware of the fact that the tow yards are going to charge a daily storage rate. And sometimes you don't even know that. Sometimes the car gets towed. Your insurance company says, we're going to tow this off, or even the cop at the scene may say, okay, we're calling in a tow company. They're going to take care of this. And you leave the scene, or you may not even be at the scene. It might be your car that somebody else borrowed. And that's what happened in a discussion that I had with somebody this week. You may not even be aware of the tow company that took the car until ultimately you get a letter that says, we still have your car. It's been 3 weeks. When are you going to come get your car? Well, what happens is, if there's a dispute between the insurance companies for the different drivers as to who caused the crash, or specifically in the case that I'm dealing with this week, if an insurance company takes the position that the person that caused the crash was a unauthorized driver in the vehicle because that person had been excluded from the policy, well, guess what? They can exclude coverage for the entire accident. And therefore, this vehicle has been sitting in a storage lot for 3 weeks, incurring daily storage rates, which can be $25, $50, $75 a day. And guess whose responsibility it is to pay the storage fees before you can get your car out? The owner of the car. In this particular instance, the owner of the car wasn't even in the car that was involved in the crash. It was her daughter. And the owner contacted me this week and said, well, what am I supposed to do? Because I can't afford the daily storage rates have got, it's up to $1,600 or something like that. She said, I can't afford to pay it. Well, I said, the tow yard is not going to let the car go until you pay it. And so you talk about a catch-22, because every single day that amount is going to go up, 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 and yet she can't afford to pay it as it is. And so she's in a very difficult situation, and that's a situation that can arise from a car accident. So if you find yourself in any kind of a car accident and you have any questions at all, feel free to call me. My toll-free number that you can use anytime to ask me any questions at all is 833-VASTOLA. I tried to make it easy so that if, and believe it or not, people do this, but if you feel like you need to have questions answered from the scene of an accident, if you can remember the number, then call me, 833-VASTOLA. That's assuming that you don't already have a lawyer. Obviously, if you already have a lawyer, then talk to your own. But if you just need questions answered, and again, there's no obligation to hire me as your lawyer. I'm just there as a public service to be able to answer questions for you and make sure you're on the right track.
I got a question.
Sure.
What if the officer on duty doesn't get the witness statement? So let's say a witness stayed that watched the accident happen that you're not at fault in, but it's kind of a confusing situation, but the officer doesn't take down their statement.
Well, that's an excellent question, Elliot. I appreciate you asking that. And that was not planted for anybody that might be wondering, because it happens. And unfortunately, it happens frequently, because I'll talk to people in my office. They say, yeah, there was a guy over on the sidewalk that, he told me that he saw everything. And then I say, okay, well, did the officer take his statement? No, I don't think so, or I don't know. And then we'll get the police report, and sure enough, there's no witnesses listed. So it's crucial. And Elliot, thank you again, because this is a very good point. It is absolutely crucial, if you are able to, because if you're incapacitated, then obviously you can't do it, get the names and contact numbers of any witness at the scene, because you have to assume, and no offense to all the police officers out there, they're overworked, and sometimes for one reason or another, a witness may leave a scene because they're sick of waiting around. So I don't mean to offend traffic officers out there, I really don't. But there are situations where witness statements are not taken. Witnesses are not identified in the police report. And as you can imagine, if you didn't know who the person was, how on earth are you going to be able to find that person? A lot of people say, well, what about the traffic light video cameras? Don't put any faith in traffic light video cameras. Okay, those things are worthless. So if you know of a witness who is there at the scene, get that person's name and contact information and say, may I contact you in the future? Because that could be the difference between anybody being able to help you versus you being stuck in a situation like this poor woman with her car in a storage lot that's incurring daily rates. And there's really no easy way out. So good question, Elliot. Thank you for that. But that's a good point. Make sure that you document that. Grab your phone. If you have a smartphone these days, most people have a notes app. If you don't have a notes app, download a notes app. There's about 100 of them out there. And you can just type into the notes section of your phone somebody's name and phone number and say witness. And that's all you need to do. You're good to go. So another issue that comes up from a car accident that may or may not be your fault is, who is going to pay for my rental? Well, that's a great question. And it depends. It depends on whether or not you and or the other driver elected for optional rental coverage. Now, oftentimes, even if the other driver opted for rental coverage, that rental coverage is not going to extend to you. It just depends on the insurance company and their policy on rental. Oftentimes, if somebody purchases a rental coverage on their own policy, it's to give that person a rental, not a rental to anybody that they may have, damaged the vehicle. So, again, review your automobile policy. Check to see if you have collision coverage first. Remember, that's the coverage that you can use to pay to fix your car if the other driver doesn't have any insurance or doesn't have enough. And also check to see what your rental rates are. And if it says rental rejected, then talk to your agent about getting some basic rental coverage, because even if you have the most basic rental coverage at the cheapest rate, you can get into something. All right. Now, the rental car companies, they don't really, when you're involved in a car accident and you show up and say, I need a rental, I was involved in a car accident, they'll look at your daily rate to see what you're going to pay by day. But they're not so strict that they're going to put you into the geo spec because you only have $20 a day at a rental rate. They'll put you into something, and it's better than nothing. I promise you. I've got a case where a client had a job lined up, and he wasn't able to start his job. He had a job. I don't make this stuff up. He was in a car accident. He was supposed to start a job the next day as a valet, but he had to drive to get to the job, and the only vehicle that he had for use was involved in a crash the day before, and his car was totaled. It was totaled. It was a Pontiac Grand Am, and he couldn't get to work. So, we're hoping, because this is a recent crash, we're hoping that they're going to hold the job available for him, but there's the chance that they may not. They may have to hire some other valet, and then he's lost his job. And that's because he didn't have rental. So he had no way to get, he had no way to get to his work. So if you've never been involved in a car accident, and if you've never had these problems before, it doesn't occur to you to opt for these optional coverages because you don't know how important they are. And I don't mean to be a doomsday kind of person. All I'm saying is I've experienced secondhand the misery of people that are experiencing these problems firsthand, and I don't want it to be you. So make sure that you understand what these coverages are. Make sure you have them if you need them. If you're a person of wealth and you can afford a rental car, well, then you don't need it on your policy. I understand that. But make sure that if you feel like you might need the help with a rental car, that you opt for it on your insurance, because the nature of insurance is that if you pay us premium now, it is a fraction of the cost of what you're going to have to pay in full price later on. That's the nature of insurance. So, rental issues. Review your policy. And most importantly, review your policy to make sure that you have some coverage to compensate you in the event that you're involved in an accident with somebody else and it was somebody else's negligence. Now remember, if you cause an accident, you don't get to get reimbursed for that. You don't get to seek compensation for your own negligence. But we have a client, and again, I don't make this stuff up. My associate signed up a new client on Thursday of this past week. He was riding a motorcycle. He was hit by a woman in a Prius. And by Friday afternoon, we knew the amounts of the coverages for both him and the other driver. And so guess what those amounts were? Well, he had no policy because he was on a motorcycle. And the lady in the Prius had the state required minimums, which are PIP and property damage, which means she was not carrying the optional coverage of bodily injury coverage, which is the only type of coverage that he would have been able to tap into to seek compensation of injuries. And he was I don't want to say catastrophically injured, but he was injured significantly. And so by the following day's afternoon, we had to contact the client to say, regrettably, there's no insurance here to compensate you for your injuries. He could have changed all of that. Now, he can't change it retroactively. There's nothing you can do to go back and change your coverages on your policy. But that could have been different if he had known, if he had a crystal ball to say, you know what, on Thursday of this week, I'm going to be involved in a car crash. Let me go ahead and up my coverages, or let me make sure I get a motorcycle policy. Thank you, Elliot. So be mindful that the state of Florida does not require any kind of insurance coverage for an automobile accident, including a motorcycle accident, where you will automatically be compensated for your injuries. It just doesn't do that. You have to be careful and do that voluntarily with optional coverage. Make sure that your policy has bodily injury coverage. Make certain that it has uninsured motorist coverage. And thank you for listening. I'm Jeff Vastola. You've been listening to Vastola on the Law. And if you need to speak with me anytime, anywhere, remember my toll-free number, 833-VASTOLA. Until next week, do the right thing.
You've been listening to Know Your Rights with attorney Jeff Vastola. Tune in next week for more free legal advice and answers to your specific questions. You can call Jeff on his cell phone after the show by dialing 833-VASTOLA. That's 833-827-8652.